Hello, and welcome back. Before we start this week's episode, I want to share that in all of the podcast stories and research that I do, I intentionally avoid talking about race. Because to me, history and these stories are about the person. It's their character, it's who they are, it's what they accomplished, it's what they experienced. That's what I focus on. But this story is a little different. It occurred in 1926 in King George County. But this story specifically highlights civility and kindness and love for your neighbor, regardless of their skin color. I hope you enjoy. It was January 4th, 1926, exactly 100 years ago, in King George County, Virginia. The country was in the middle of the Prohibition, and Virginia was no exception. The Prohibition was signed into law under the 18th Amendment, prohibiting the manufacturing, transporting, and selling of any alcohol. It would last from 1919 to 1933. The 21st Amendment repealed the Prohibition formally, and there was great rejoicing. Hi, this is Sarah, and you're listening to another episode on Ladies First, Not Really. Martha Peyton was born in 1843 and had been an enslaved mammy until the end of the Civil War. There wasn't much known about her life, but in 1926, at 80 years old, she was standing before Judge Frederick W. Coleman in King George County Circuit Court with the charge of illegally selling 2 pints of homemade wine. She, of course, denied her guilt, and the only evidence was 2 other men who testified that she had sold it to them. As was common in those days, she waived her right to a trial by a jury and threw herself at the mercy of the court. Judge Coleman handed down the minimum sentence for this charge and sentenced her to 3 months in the county jail and a $25 fine. The Daily Star noted how scared this poor woman was as the sheriff tried to guide her out of the courthouse. She cried out to the judge, saying, "For God's sake, Judge, don't put me in jail." Unfortunately, this did not deter the judge, as he was following what the law was written, and she was taken to the county jail. Of course, there is no record of these 2 men who allegedly purchased the illegal alcohol receiving any consequence for their part in the transaction. Of course not. They were doing their civil duty by reporting her, right? There was very little she could do from a defense standpoint. The attorneys present at the trial, though, disapproved so heartily and believed the sentence was too severe. The judge indicated it was the court's place to impose the law as it was written, and if they objected to the law, then they would need to take it up the legislative chain. Now, protection for women at this time in our country's history was minimal. They were generally unable to secure legal representation, scientific evidence verification was non-existent, and witness testimonies were what the courts had to mostly go on. So if you were arrested, your fate was a true gamble unless you had money or the ability to plead your case effectively with evidence and witnesses. However, for this woman, mercy was just around the corner. After she was taken to the county jail, the attorneys, all men, white men, present at the time of her sentencing, signed a petition for her pardon and sent it to Virginia Governor E. Lee Trinkle. The basis for their petition targeted that the verdict was based on the testimonies of the 2 witnesses who allegedly purchased the liquor, and one of the sales supposedly had occurred approximately 12 months before then, a whole year. The following attorneys were W. A. Rose, Thomas L. Hunter, Commonwealth Attorney Joseph A. Billingsley, George Taylor, W. Butzler, C. O'Connor Gulrick, Lee J. Graves, C. Marshall King, W.B.F. Cole, and George Mason. I name them because they were the ones who went out of their way to petition for this lady. The petition attracted a surprising amount of interest across Virginia. Not only did these men plead for leniency, but an unknown member of the House and an ex-senator contacted the governor as well. So on January 16, 1926, Martha Peyton received a full pardon from Governor Trinkle. She only spent 2 weeks of the 3-month sentence in the county jail and was reported to have received the news with feigned delight and went back to her home rejoicing that she had gained her liberty. In this letter of pardon, the governor lists that under the conditions and the age of Martha should be respected, also considering the character of the 2 witnesses, the confidence he has in the 10 men who filed the petition on her behalf, and she had maintained her innocence. He should give her the benefit of the doubt and approve the petition for pardon. Now, Martha's happy ending is rare indeed. As I mentioned above, that women had limited resources at this time and were generally unable to successfully appeal sentencing once it was handed down. However, this story is a testament that civility, kindness, and respect existed in this Southern community at a time when memories of life before the Civil War and the wounds of the battles had become scars. If these 10 men had not stepped up to fight for this woman's safety and freedom, it's unknown if she would have even survived. I hope you enjoyed this story. Until next time. For more information, visit my blog at rebelliouscorsets.com.